When he first joined the company, everyone noticed him. He walked with confidence, spoke clearly, and carried himself like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. At first, people admired that. He was sharp, full of ideas, and had a natural way of taking charge. If there was a problem, he fixed it. If there was a challenge, he faced it. Slowly, his name started to spread across departments as someone who always delivered results. The company had been struggling to keep up with competitors, and his arrival felt like a fresh start. He wasn't afraid to make big decisions. When others hesitated, he acted. His first few projects went better than anyone expected, and soon upper management began to notice him too. They liked his energy, his drive, and his bold attitude. Within a year, he was promoted to manager. It was fast, but to him it felt deserved. After all, he had worked hard, stayed late, and pushed himself more than anyone else. At first, his team admired him. He motivated them with strong speeches and gave them clear goals. He had a way of making them feel like they were part of something important. But as time passed, something in his behavior began to change. The confidence that once inspired people started turning into arrogance. He stopped listening to others during meetings. When someone tried to share an idea, he often interrupted and said, "I've already thought of that." When a junior staff member made a small mistake, he didn't guide them. He scolded them in front of everyone. It wasn't that he wanted to be cruel. He simply believed that his way was always the right one. Success came easily to him in those early months, and with every win, his pride grew a little more. He began to think the company's progress was entirely because of him. When someone praised the team, he would say, "It's really my strategy that made it happen." He stopped giving credit to those who worked under him, and slowly, people began to feel frustrated. Some stayed quiet out of fear, while others started losing interest in giving their best. They showed up, did the minimum, and left on time. The spark that once filled the office started to fade. One afternoon, during a review meeting, one of the senior directors gave him feedback. She told him that while his numbers looked great, his team's morale seemed low. She suggested that he focus more on teamwork and communication. He smiled politely but didn't take it seriously. After she left, he muttered to a colleague, "She doesn't understand how real success works. People just need to follow, not question." That attitude became his new approach. He saw leadership as control, not guidance. Even in simple things, his pride began to show. When the office assistant brought him tea, he barely said thank you. When a team member tried to explain a small error, he wouldn't listen. If a client praised another employee, he made sure to remind them who led the project. It wasn't long before people stopped talking to him casually. They only spoke when necessary, and even then, they chose their words carefully. He didn't notice the change. In his eyes, silence meant respect. He didn't realize it was actually fear. Outside of work, he liked telling his friends how important he had become. He spoke about his team as if they were lucky to have him. He often said, "If I wasn't there, that department would fall apart." His friends laughed and congratulated him, but deep down, one or two of them wondered how long that kind of pride could last before it caused trouble. Back at the office, his attitude started creating real problems. A talented employee tried to share a creative marketing idea that could have saved the company money. He brushed it off without listening. A few weeks later, another company launched a similar campaign and became an online hit. Instead of admitting that he might have missed something, he blamed his team for not being proactive enough. Slowly, talented people began to leave. One by one, the people who had once respected him started resigning. He told himself they couldn't handle pressure. The truth was, they just couldn't handle him. As more employees left, new ones joined, but none stayed long. The department's performance started to depend entirely on his personal efforts. He worked longer hours, skipped meals, and stayed in the office late at night. On the outside, it looked like dedication, but inside it was fear of failure and of losing the image he had built. He couldn't accept that leadership wasn't about being right all the time. He had built his identity on being the smartest person in the room, and now that belief was slowly isolating him. One Friday evening, the company held a team dinner to celebrate a small success. Everyone was supposed to relax, but the atmosphere was tense. People laughed softly, spoke in low voices, and avoided sitting near him. He didn't notice it right away. He sat at the center of the table, talking about his strategies and achievements. When he looked around, he saw polite smiles but no real engagement. One of the junior employees excused herself early, saying she had a family emergency. Another quietly left after finishing his meal. Soon half the table was empty. He sat there with his glass of water, confused. People these days don't appreciate success, he said quietly to himself. But deep down, a small part of him knew it wasn't about them. It was about him. The next week, his director called him for a private meeting. She said there had been several complaints about his behavior, not from one or two people, but from almost the entire team. She explained that while his work results were still good, the company valued collaboration and respect. "We can't grow if people are afraid to speak," she said gently. He listened but didn't really hear her. Instead, he felt insulted. To him, it sounded like the company was turning against him after everything he had done. He left the meeting angry and silent. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the words complaints and team morale. He told himself they were just jealous of his success. But as he sat alone in his apartment, looking at his phone with no messages or calls from friends, he felt a quiet emptiness. For years he had worked to prove himself, but in the process he had pushed everyone away. He thought being feared meant being respected. Now he was starting to see the difference. Still, his pride wouldn't let him change. Not yet. The next morning he walked into the office with the same confident stride, wearing his best suit and a firm expression. If anyone looked at him differently, he ignored it. If someone avoided eye contact, he pretended not to notice. He told himself he would prove everyone wrong by delivering even bigger results. But somewhere deep down, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was beginning to slip from his hands, something more valuable than any project or promotion. That quiet unease marked the start of a slow but certain downfall, one he couldn't yet see. His arrogance had built him up like a tall tower, but now small cracks were beginning to appear. And just like any tower built too high on pride, it was only a matter of time before the first piece began to fall. After the meeting with the director, he acted like nothing had happened. To his team, he was still the same man, confident, controlling, and quick to remind everyone who was in charge. But deep down, the seed of anger had started to grow. He didn't forgive the team for speaking against him. He didn't forgive the company for questioning his leadership. In his mind, they had betrayed him. He started to change the way he ran things. Every small mistake became a reason for him to scold someone. If an employee came late by a few minutes, he would make it a big issue in front of others. During meetings, he no longer asked for ideas. He simply gave orders. The office that was once filled with quiet energy now felt heavy. People stopped laughing. They worked in silence, waiting for the day to end. Some of the older employees tried to talk to him privately. One of them said softly, "You've achieved a lot, but people don't follow someone they fear. They follow someone they trust." He smiled coldly and said, "If they do their job right, they have nothing to fear." That was the end of the conversation. As weeks passed, small cracks in the department began to show. Reports were delayed, clients started complaining about poor coordination, and deadlines were missed more often. Instead of fixing the real problem, he doubled down on discipline. He began holding long meetings where he did most of the talking. He blamed his team for being lazy, careless, and slow. The more he pushed them, the less motivated they became. There was one project that everyone had high hopes for, a major contract that could bring the company good profit and reputation. The marketing head tried to involve him in team discussions, but he brushed them off. "I know what I'm doing," he said. "Just follow my lead." His confidence used to sound inspiring. Now it sounded like arrogance. His team worked hard, even when he didn't give them credit. They stayed late, checked details, and tried to make things right. But he rarely noticed. When the project got approved, he didn't thank anyone. Instead, he sent an email to the higher management claiming that his strategy and leadership were the key to success. Some of his colleagues read that email and quietly shook their heads. They had seen how others had put their effort into it. The tension kept growing. The department that had once been known for its unity was now known for its stress. People avoided each other, scared that anything they said might be repeated or twisted. It wasn't just his pride that caused problems, and it was the fear that came with it. One afternoon, one of his most reliable employees submitted a resignation letter. When he asked why, the man said, "I can't work in an environment where no one is respected." He didn't respond. He just nodded coldly and said, "Good luck." Inside, he felt insulted. "They're weak," he told himself. They can't handle pressure. But a quiet thought echoed in his mind, and what if they weren't weak? What if he was just pushing them away? He ignored that thought and continued as if nothing happened. More people left over the next few months. Some went to other companies and others just couldn't take the pressure anymore. The HR department even raised concerns about the turnover rate, but he brushed it off, saying, "People come and go. It's not my problem." When he walked through the office, he didn't see friendly faces anymore. He saw people avoiding his eyes, pretending to be busy when he passed by. He convinced himself that it was because they respected him, not because they feared him. Then came the first real setback. A client who had been loyal for years suddenly ended their contract. The loss was big, and the higher management demanded answers. They called him in for a meeting and asked what went wrong. He didn't take responsibility. He blamed the marketing team, the delivery team, and even the client for being unreasonable. When one of the directors asked if he had followed up personally, he said yes, but it was a lie. The truth was he had been too busy proving his authority to care about maintaining relationships. After that incident, management started to keep a closer eye on him. He didn't like it. He felt as if they were doubting his abilities, and that made his pride burn even more. He became defensive, short-tempered, and impatient. At home, the stress began to show too. He would check emails late at night and wake up before dawn. His reflection in the mirror looked older, tired, and slightly bitter. But he didn't see that as a warning sign. He saw it as proof of his hard work, proof that he was carrying the company on his shoulders. The truth was far different. The company was surviving not because of him, but in spite of him. His team was quietly fixing his mistakes, covering for his temper, and trying to hold things together. But no one could do that forever. One morning, during a project briefing, one of the junior staff members hesitated before presenting an idea. He immediately interrupted her. "If you're not confident, don't waste our time," he said sharply. The room fell silent. The young woman lowered her eyes and quietly sat down. No one spoke after that. The meeting ended early, and everyone returned to their desks in uncomfortable silence. Later that day, the director who had warned him earlier sent him an email. It was short but clear. She asked him to attend a leadership workshop focused on communication and empathy. He felt insulted again. "Do they really think I need lessons on leadership?" he muttered. Instead of attending, he sent a reply saying he was too busy with ongoing projects. The following month, the results of an internal survey came out. It showed that his department had the lowest employee satisfaction rate in the entire company. It was a clear sign that something was wrong, but he didn't accept it. "Surveys mean nothing," he said. "People always complain when they're asked too many questions." By now, even some of his closest colleagues had stopped defending him. He was alone at the top, surrounded by people who only spoke when they had to. The once bright office now felt cold and lifeless. Then came another mistake, one that could not be ignored. During a presentation with investors, he misrepresented a key figure. It wasn't intentional, but it showed poor coordination between teams. When the investors questioned the numbers, he tried to cover it up by blaming others. But this time, the finance manager spoke up. "We gave you the correct data," she said calmly. "You just didn't review it with us before presenting." The room went silent. For the first time, he felt cornered. After the meeting, he stormed back to his office, furious. He slammed the door and sat in silence. His heart was beating fast, not because of the mistake, but because he felt his image slipping. He knew the management would hear about it soon, and that scared him more than anything. That evening, as he sat alone, he thought about how things used to be. The early days when people smiled when he walked in, when ideas flowed easily and when success felt shared. Somewhere along the way, that had all disappeared. But instead of admitting his fault, he convinced himself that everyone else had changed. He believed they had become ungrateful, lazy, and weak. The truth was simpler and harsher. His pride had turned the workplace into a battlefield. His voice, once filled with inspiration, now carried fear. And though he couldn't see it yet, his downfall had already begun. Just didn't know that the next mistake he made would cost him far more than his reputation. It would take away everything he had built. The big project came when the company needed a new idea to survive in a changing market. Sales were dropping and competition was growing fast. The directors called a meeting with all department heads to discuss new strategies. Everyone was encouraged to share ideas. When it was his turn, he stood up confidently and spoke for almost half an hour about his vision. His plan sounded bold. It involved launching a new product line that would be different from anything the company had ever done before. People listened carefully, but a few managers raised concerns. One of them said it would be risky and expensive. Another suggested testing the idea on a small scale first. He brushed them off. "If you keep worrying about risk, you'll never grow," he said firmly. "We need to be brave, not careful." The directors were impressed by his confidence, and before long, his proposal was approved. He felt proud. Finally, he could prove once again that he was the smartest one in the room. In the beginning, he worked day and night on the project. He called it his masterpiece. He demanded full control, saying he didn't need too many opinions. He didn't like when others questioned his approach. The finance team warned him that the budget was too high. The marketing department said they needed more time for research. But he refused to listen. "You just do your jobs," he told them. "Leave the thinking to me." His team tried to follow his orders, but it was difficult. The timelines were unrealistic and the workload doubled. Some staff members even worked weekends just to keep up. Yet no matter how hard they worked, he always found something to criticize. "You're too slow," he would say. "You don't understand the big picture." People began to lose interest again, and even those who once believed in him started to keep their distance. As the months passed, small problems began to appear. A few suppliers delayed deliveries. The marketing team missed key deadlines, and costs went higher than planned. When these issues were brought up, he refused to take responsibility. "If people did their jobs right, we wouldn't be in this mess," he said angrily. But deep down, he knew that some of those mistakes were his. He had rushed decisions, ignored advice, and refused to let others handle their parts. Still, his pride wouldn't allow him to admit it. The tension inside the office became heavier each week. Employees whispered about how risky the project had become. Some even said it might fail completely. When one of his senior staff tried to warn him, he snapped. "Don't lecture me," he said coldly. "You have no idea how to lead." That staff member resigned the same day. The project finally reached its launch stage after months of hard work. He planned a big event and invited important clients and investors. He stood on stage giving a speech filled with confidence and pride. The audience clapped, and for a short moment it felt like everything was worth it. He smiled, thinking that this was his moment of victory, but reality hit hard soon after. Sales were much lower than expected. Customers didn't respond well to the new product. Reviews were mixed, and complaints started to pour in about quality and pricing. Within weeks, the numbers began to fall sharply. The finance department warned him again, saying the company was losing money fast. He didn't want to hear it. "It's just the beginning," he said. "People will come around." They always do, but they didn't. After 2 months, it became clear that the project had failed. The company had lost a large sum of money, and everyone wanted answers. The board called an emergency meeting. He walked in with his usual confidence, but this time the room felt colder. The directors asked him what went wrong. He started blaming others, the marketing team, the sales staff, even the customers. He said people hadn't worked hard enough and that the market wasn't ready for innovation. One of the directors interrupted him. "We warned you about the risks," she said calmly. "Why didn't you listen?" He froze for a moment but quickly regained his tone. "Because playing it safe never brings success," he replied, but his voice didn't sound as steady as before. Another manager spoke up and said, "Several employees reported that they raised concerns during the project, but you dismissed them." He frowned. "That's not true," he said. But the manager placed a folder on the table. Inside were emails, reports, and messages, all showing that people had tried to warn him. For the first time, he felt the ground shake beneath his confidence. The meeting ended with disappointment. The directors said they needed time to review his performance and the project's results. As he walked out of the room, he felt everyone's eyes on him, not with admiration but pity. He had gone from being the company's rising star to the man responsible for its biggest failure. That evening, he sat alone in his office, staring at the computer screen. His reflection on the dark glass looked tired and unfamiliar. He remembered the early days when people smiled when he walked in. Now no one came to his door. No one asked for advice. The silence in the office was louder than ever. He tried to convince himself it wasn't his fault. The market was tough, he muttered. The team didn't give their best. But a small voice inside whispered the truth. He had done this to himself. He had been too proud to listen, too blind to see what was coming. The next morning, he received an email from the director asking for a detailed report on every step of the failed project. It felt like an investigation, and in a way it was. He stayed in the office all day, writing explanations that sounded reasonable but avoided personal responsibility. He thought if he made the report sound technical enough, they wouldn't blame him. But somewhere deep down, he knew they already had. In the following weeks, the office atmosphere changed completely. People spoke softly, avoided his presence, and focused on their own tasks. He was no longer the center of attention. His once powerful position now felt fragile. The confidence he had carried for years began to crack. One afternoon, he overheard two employees talking in the hallway. They didn't know he was nearby. One of them said, "He used to be amazing, but now he's just angry all the time." The other replied, "I think he's scared." Their words hit him harder than he expected. He didn't show it, but his chest felt heavy. Later that night, he went home and sat quietly in his living room. The apartment was silent. He had no one to talk to. No messages from colleagues, no calls from friends. He opened his laptop and read old emails where people once thanked him for his leadership and support. That was a different time. A time before pride took over. He wondered if it was too late to change things. But instead of trying to make peace with his team, he chose to fight back. He convinced himself he could still fix everything if he just proved his worth again. He started working on another idea, one that would redeem him. He told no one about it, thinking this would be his comeback. But the truth was, he was no longer the person people trusted. His name had become a warning, a reminder of what happens when confidence turns into arrogance. And as he sat there late into the night, sketching plans for another big idea, he didn't realize that this new attempt, born out of pride and desperation, would not save him. It would only push him closer to losing everything he had left. The failure of the big project had left the company shaken. Losses were mounting, and the directors were under pressure from investors. Everyone was looking for answers. And although no one said it directly, most people knew who was to blame. He tried to act calm, pretending that everything was under control, but inside, he was filled with anxiety. He couldn't stop thinking about that meeting, about the faces around the table and how they had looked at him. For years, those faces had admired him. Now they looked at him with doubt and disappointment. In the weeks that followed, he worked harder than ever. He came early, stayed late, and refused to take any time off. But no matter how hard he tried, nothing seemed to change. The company's confidence in him was gone. Every report he sent was questioned. Every suggestion he made was double-checked. The freedom he once enjoyed was replaced by constant supervision. He wasn't used to being treated like that. It hurt his pride more than anything else. He told himself that he just needed one more chance and one project that would prove everyone wrong. When the company began planning another campaign to recover from losses, he volunteered to lead it. At first, the directors hesitated, but he convinced them with his usual confidence. "I've learned from the last one," he said. "This time I'll make it right." They agreed, but with strict conditions. He would have to work closely with other managers and follow every review process carefully. He nodded, but deep down he didn't like the idea of sharing control. As the new project started, his old habits returned. He gave orders instead of listening. He made quick decisions without discussing them with the team. Whenever someone questioned him, he took it personally. "I know what I'm doing," he would say in a sharp tone. The team, already tired from the last failure, followed his instructions quietly. No one wanted to argue. People had lost faith in him, but they still respected the company enough to do their jobs. A few months later, the cracks appeared again. This time, the mistakes were smaller but more frequent. Emails were missed, deadlines slipped, and important data was overlooked. When these issues came up, he reacted the same way he always did, by blaming others. He said his team wasn't serious enough, that they lacked focus and dedication. The truth was, no one felt motivated under him anymore. The energy and creativity that once filled the office were gone. The only thing left was silence and tension. One afternoon, a senior manager from another department came to talk to him. She spoke gently, trying to reason with him. "You're a talented man," she said. "But leadership isn't just about being right. It's about making others feel valued. He listened quietly but didn't respond. After she left, he sat for a while staring at his desk. He wanted to believe she was wrong, but a small part of him knew she was right. Still, his pride wouldn't let him admit it. Instead, he convinced himself that she was jealous of his position. As time passed, the company's patience began to fade. There were more complaints about his behavior, not just from his department but from others who had to work with him. He had built a reputation that was impossible to ignore. When he entered a meeting room, conversations would stop. People didn't want to be on his team. They didn't want to work with someone who never listened. He noticed it, but instead of reflecting on it, he grew colder. They just can't handle strong leadership, he told himself. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Friday morning when he was called into a meeting with the directors. The room was quiet when he entered. The faces were serious. One of the directors began speaking calmly but firmly. She explained that after reviewing his recent performance and the feedback from his colleagues, the company had decided to remove him from his managerial role. For a few seconds, he didn't move. He just stared at her, thinking he had misheard. "You're demoting me?" he asked. The director nodded slowly. "We believe this is best for both you and the company. You'll still be with us, but in a different capacity." His heart dropped. Demotion. The word echoed in his mind like thunder. He had spent years climbing the ladder, building his image as a leader, and now it was being taken away. He tried to argue. He said it was unfair, that people had turned against him because of jealousy. But the directors didn't argue back. They had heard enough excuses over the years. The decision was final. When he walked out of that room, it felt like the longest walk of his life. People in the hallway looked up briefly, then turned away. No one said a word. That silence hurt more than any insult could. By the time he reached his office, he felt numb. He sat down staring at the wall, unable to think clearly. All his pride, all his confidence, and it suddenly felt meaningless. For the first time in a long time, he felt small. Over the next few weeks, the reality began to sink in. His office was moved to a smaller corner room. The people who once reported to him now reported to someone else. He wasn't invited to big meetings anymore. Emails that once flooded his inbox stopped coming. The phone barely rang. He had gone from being one of the most powerful people in the company to just another employee sitting quietly at his desk. He told himself he didn't care, but every day it ate away at him. He tried to reach out to some of his old colleagues, but most of them avoided him. The few who did reply kept their conversations short and polite. The friendships he thought he had built were gone. People remembered how he had treated them when he was on top. No one wanted to be close to him now that he had fallen. At home, he began to change too. He stopped talking about work. He avoided mirrors. He ate his meals in silence, lost in thought. He kept replaying the past in his mind, wondering where things had gone wrong. Every time he thought about it, one truth became clearer. It wasn't bad luck, and it wasn't betrayal. It was his own pride. But even then, he couldn't say the words out loud. It was too painful to admit. Months later, the company faced another challenge, and this time he wasn't involved. A younger manager led the project, and it turned out to be a success. When the announcement came, the office celebrated. He watched quietly from his desk as people clapped and congratulated each other. The same room that once cheered for him now cheered for someone else. He smiled faintly but felt a sharp sting in his chest. That used to be him, the one everyone admired. After the event, he walked to the break room for coffee. 2 junior employees were talking near the counter. One of them didn't recognize him and said, "Who is that guy sitting alone in the corner? He looked like he's been here forever." The other replied, "Oh, that's him. He used to be the big boss once." They both went quiet for a second, then changed the subject. He didn't say anything. He just poured his coffee and left quietly. That night, he sat in his car in the parking lot for a long time before driving home. The lights of the building reflected on the windshield, and for a moment he remembered the first day he had joined. The excitement, the ambition, the feeling that he could do anything. He had come so far only to lose it all because he couldn't control his own pride. He finally understood something he had ignored for years. Success isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the one who gets the most credit. It's about how you treat the people who stand beside you. But by the time he realized that, it was too late. The damage had already been done. Still, somewhere inside, a small part of him hoped that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to rebuild what he had lost. Not his title, not his power, but the respect he once had. The road ahead would be long and lonely, but for the first time in years he was starting to see himself clearly, and seeing the truth was the first step toward what would come next. Months passed and life had changed completely for him. The once confident manager who walked through glass doors in a tailored suit now found himself sitting alone in his small apartment, thinking about how quickly everything had slipped away. The silence that used to feel peaceful now felt heavy. He used to have constant messages, emails, and calls, but now his phone stayed quiet. For a long time, he refused to believe that his pride was the reason for his downfall. He blamed everyone else, the company, the people who didn't understand his vision, and even luck. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, that excuse started to lose its strength. He began to see things clearly. Every night he replayed the moments when people tried to warn him, and how he had pushed them away with his arrogance. He remembered the meetings where his team had shared ideas that he ignored, and the faces of those who had worked hard but never got credit. He thought about the day when the company's director called him into the office to tell him that his position was being terminated. Back then, he had walked out angry and humiliated, thinking they were making a mistake. But now, sitting in his dimly lit room, he knew the truth. The mistake had been his own. One morning, he decided he couldn't live like that anymore. He opened his laptop and started looking for jobs. Most companies didn't respond, and those who did weren't interested once they learned about his past record. His name had once represented success. Now it carried a shadow of arrogance. It hurt, but he didn't give up. He knew this time had to be different. Eventually, a small firm offered him a role, not as a manager, not even as a senior employee, but as a basic project assistant. The salary was nothing compared to what he used to earn, but he accepted it. For the first time in years, he walked into a workplace where nobody knew who he had been. There were no fancy offices or personal assistants, just people working hard, supporting each other, and sharing ideas freely. At first, it was difficult for him to adjust. His old habits tried to come back, the urge to control everything, to prove he was smarter. But he caught himself each time. He reminded himself how his pride had destroyed everything before. Slowly, he began to listen more. When someone had an idea, he didn't interrupt or correct them. He took notes, asked questions, and gave honest appreciation. People started to notice the change. They found him easy to work with. When mistakes happened, instead of blaming others, he took responsibility and helped fix them. It wasn't easy to rebuild his image, but this time he wasn't doing it for approval. He was doing it to be a better person. Months later, the company was preparing for a big client presentation. The manager in charge fell sick, and the team didn't know how to proceed. That's when he quietly offered to help. Everyone was surprised because he had never mentioned his experience in leading big projects. He worked through the weekend, guiding the team, staying humble, and ensuring everyone's ideas were included. When the presentation day came, everything went perfectly. The client was impressed, and the company secured a major deal. His manager later thanked him in front of everyone, giving him credit for his efforts. He didn't expect praise, but hearing those words filled him with quiet pride. Not the arrogant kind he once had, but the genuine pride that comes from teamwork and honesty. After that, his manager promoted him to a leadership role again, though much smaller than the one he had lost years ago. But this time he handled it differently. He made sure to support his team, celebrate their achievements, and listen when they spoke. He even mentored younger employees, teaching them not just about work but about humility and respect. Outside work, he reconnected with old friends he had pushed away. Some were hesitant at first, remembering how he used to be, but they saw the change in him. He didn't try to impress them with stories of success. He spoke openly about his failures and what they had taught him. That honesty touched people. Slowly, he started to rebuild those broken relationships. One day, while having coffee with an old colleague who once worked under him, the person asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" He smiled faintly and said, "Of course. But if they hadn't, I wouldn't have learned what I really needed to know." He explained that losing everything had been painful, but it had given him something far more valuable: self-awareness. He realized that success means nothing if you lose the people around you. Respect can't be demanded. It has to be earned. As years passed, he built a stable and peaceful life. He never reached the same high corporate position again, but that didn't bother him. His days were filled with work he enjoyed, people he respected, and a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. Sometimes he would walk past tall office buildings and remember his old life. He would think about the man he used to be, confident, powerful, but blind to his flaws. Instead of bitterness, he felt gratitude. Losing that life had forced him to find something more meaningful. He also started sharing his story at small business workshops, speaking to young professionals about the dangers of pride. He didn't exaggerate or make himself look like a hero. He simply told the truth, how he had everything, lost it because of arrogance, and learned the hard way that success without humility doesn't last. People listened carefully, many seeing a reflection of themselves in his words. One evening after a talk, a young man came up to him and said, "I think I was becoming like you used to be. I don't want to end up losing everything." He smiled and replied, "Then you've already taken your first step, realizing it before it's too late." That night, he walked home with a sense of peace. For the first time in many years, he didn't feel like he had to prove himself. He had found his place, not at the top of a company, but within himself. He knew pride would always try to come back, whispering that he deserved more, but he had learned how to quiet that voice. Whenever he felt it rising, he reminded himself of the long nights when he had nothing, no title, no respect, no one to call. That memory kept him grounded. In the end, he didn't just rebuild a career. He rebuilt a life. A life based on kindness, patience, and understanding. A life where he valued listening as much as speaking. His story became a quiet lesson for others, a reminder that no matter how talented or successful a person becomes, humility is what keeps it all together. Pride can make someone shine for a moment, but humility makes that light last. And as he sat by his window one evening watching the sunset, he smiled to himself. The city lights started to glow, and for once he didn't feel like he was missing out on anything. He had finally learned that true success isn't about being above others. It's about walking beside them.